What's up, guys, and stay tuned because today we're going to do our very first vlogcast here on Critical Hits
and Bad Misses.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name's Clay.
And I'm Bo.
And today we are doing our very first vlogcast here on the channel. And of course, we could not do the very first one on anything else besides
Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons. It's got to be. I mean, that's basing the channel a lot on our love for Dungeons and Dragons. Our first vlogcast has to be about Dungeons and Dragons. So, I want to give you just a quick disclaimer, just seen like at the beginning of the video. We will hit a little bit on some of the actual facts and dates and stuff like that of the game. But for the most part, we're just going to be discussing our own opinions and experiences and knowledges of things that we have gathered over the course of years of playing the game and what it resulted for us. So if we are wrong about something in particular, well, just forgive us on that. But that's one of the reasons why we're not going to specifically discuss actual factual stuff. So I'm ready to have this discussion about Dungeons and Dragons. Are you?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
All right, well then let's just get right into this. Guys, we appreciate you being here today, and make sure to leave us a comment on what you think of this newest video format for Bo and I. So, Dungeons and Dragons. What is Dungeons and Dragons? You know, is it a game that you can win? Are there winners and losers? I mean, what is Dungeons and Dragons to you?
Dungeons and Dragons was it's based on a game where it's more for your imagination. The original Dungeons and Dragons is what I'm talking about. The actual sit at the table with your friends, roll up characters, play your characters. It's a fantasy world game that you have your storyteller, or what they call a dungeon master. He runs the game. He tells you what you see. He's kind of like the ultimate power who kind of puts the situations in front of you and you react to them the way you would want to. Kind of like those open world books that you can read, or just different, like a movie almost, where instead of it being the director who controls the flow of the adventure, it's more the dungeon master who puts the stuff there, and then the characters just kind of react the way they feel that their characters would react. And that's a big basis on it, is being able to kind of play a different character, be someone else. And you got to have a good imagination for this. And that's how I fell in love with it, is because of the imagination. But that's what I know. And you can't have really, I guess you can have a winner, but you can't, there's not like an ultimate winner at the end of each session. It's a multi-session game. You have to break it down to, well, I won that battle, so I guess I'm a winner. Losing means I died, or I got my butt handed to me and I'm running away. Then I'm a loser. But that's the way I feel about it.
Oh, definitely. A lot of the same things, you know, like basing it, Dungeons and Dragons from differences from like a classical board game. I mean, yes, you know, you could have like miniatures and stuff like that representing who your characters were, and you can have tactical maps and say that he's here and he's here. But like for a classical game where you might roll the dice and then move 6 spaces, that you don't do that, you know, with Dungeons and Dragons. You know, that there are dice there, but the dice represent your character's ability to do certain things. So it'd be like we all, well, not all of us, I don't guess, but everybody typically has the ability to drive a car. But if you're in Dungeons and Dragons and you have the ability to drive a car, a lot of times you would still have to roll the 20-sider to see exactly how well you did drive that car, or how well you didn't drive that car, and run it off into a ditch or off the side of a cliff, or whatever. So that's what the dice represent in Dungeons and Dragons. So for me, as far as like just the differences, as far as like from a board game to this, I'm not big on a lot of history of a lot of board games, so I don't know which one would be the most complex or which one would have the most amount of rules or something like that. But for your typical board game, it has a small booklet of rules, and everything is combined right there within it, and there's hardly ever any updated rules. Right. Now, something like Monopoly, you may have house rules here and there where some people play, with free parking. You get money from that goes in the center, from this, that, and the other. But with Dungeons and Dragons, there are 3 main rule books, which would be the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. And all 3 of them together, are roughly 3 inches thick. So, I mean, there's approximately 900 pages worth of rules for Dungeons and Dragons. So it's not just this little pamphlet. Now, you can get a basic rule book for Dungeons and Dragons, which comes in that little pamphlet form. But for the most part, Dungeons and Dragons is based on this huge ruled system, and different rules do come about quite often. As far as like. The different things happen now for rule reasons as opposed to 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Correct.
Rules have changed over the years, but the basic is still the same, I think, anyway. But so board games versus role-playing games, is that what you would say is probably the biggest difference, or just the fact that you have to, I guess you get more into whatever you're playing. You're just not, I'm the shoe. Well, no, you're not just a shoe in Dungeons and Dragons. Right. I mean, you have this entire complex character that you have created to play this game.
Yes, there is a big difference. The rules is one of the main things. I agree. Another thing is, like you said, you get into your character. If you really like this character, you want it to live. You'll make decisions that will help advance him,
right? But
also keeps him alive. And different between the other games, when you do a family night game night, people don't normally do Dungeons and Dragons because we kind of, from experienced players, if we only have a couple hours, we can kind of get into it, but we call it a short session. In a board game, if it lasts 2 hours, that's a long board game.
It is a long board game.
So that's a big difference too, is that when you have the mind frame of going into this game, 2 hours just it's just a little drop in the bucket. In the past, we've had it to where we've started at 7, 8 o'clock at morning and played until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning the next day straight.
Yeah.
And, I mean, granted, we can't do that now.
I physically can't do that now.
But, I mean, we would used to do that. And we would feel like we never even hardly got into it. We wanted more. And that's the thing about this game, is if you don't have the imagination, and I don't want to say don't have the imagination, don't have the, I'm trying to think how to say it, the actual inspiration to want to play it in the first place, you really won't enjoy the game as much.
Right.
If you love this type of game and you can lose yourself in it, then you're going to really enjoy the game.
Right. If you don't have the desire to begin with. If you're just going to go participate because that's what a couple of your buddies are doing that night and they really into it, but you're not interested, just don't do it. Because number one, you could possibly just ruin the whole night. Number two, you could possibly really get into it and then, well, ruin the rest of your life because now you're going to show up every Sunday or whatever day. Now, that's not a bad thing. I shouldn't say ruin your life because it didn't ruin our life, but you know what I mean. So, like for us, we get together on Sundays. And Bo mentioned short session a while ago. Well, two of us, myself and one of the other players in the game, we work every other Sunday. And so I get off and he gets off most of the time at 6 p.m. So on our short session Sundays, we start at about 6:30 and go to 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So 2 to 2.5 hours.
Yes.
On long sessions, we start at between 1 and 2 and then go till 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So we have anywhere from 6.5 to 7 hours on our long sessions. And for some people, and I don't know because it's the only group that I play with these days, but for some people, 6 or 7 hours for Dungeons & Dragons session may not be what they would consider long. Because like you said, we've played 15, 16, 17-hour sessions before. Granted, we were a lot younger. We were living together at the time. Neither one of us was married. Neither one of us had kids. I mean, so we didn't have to worry about any responsibilities other than the fact that we both did have a job because we were living together. We were paying bills, and that sort of stuff. So we still had to do that. But there was a lot less actual responsibility then, and we could do it more. But matter of fact, then we were playing twice a week. I think, if I remember right, it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, maybe. I can't even remember, to tell you the truth. But on these Tuesdays and Thursdays, there was a committed group of people that would be there. Anywhere from, and it's kind of hard to maybe say committed and then break it up into anywhere from 8 to 15 people. But for the most part, we would have 8 to 15 people every Tuesday, every Thursday. And we weren't just playing Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, we had, 6 or 7 different games that we were playing. And then based upon largely who happened to be there for that session and who may have been ready to go for their next session or whatever, determined what we played. We very rarely knew ahead of time what we were going to play. But so when were you first introduced to Dungeons & Dragons, and what initial impact did that have on you when you were first introduced to it?
My first introduction was, if I'm not mistaken, it was either the year 1987 or 1988. I've heard of it, but never knew anyone that did it, never fell in those groups that did it. But I was in college. Yes, I graduated in 1987. And I went to college, and a guy was talking about it, that he used to play Dungeons & Dragons. And I talked to him. He had the basic rules. I rolled up a character. He just threw together a little something. It didn't even last, I think, an hour. And just playing that, I was hooked. I loved it. I wanted to play more, but he was already outgrown it, and he didn't really want to do it anymore. But then I started looking for other players, for people that would be interested in it. And so my college year, I started getting with these other guys that were playing. And then we started a game together. We actually lived together our second year in college. And we played quite a bit. But then I brought it home with me and kind of introduced it to some of my friends back home, my brother and Clay and different ones. So that's how I got started. But I'll let Clay take it from here.
Well, I was just going to go into, now, because of Gilbert, his brother, because of Gilbert, I think the possibility of us being friends today would have still been there. But I have a really firm belief that Dungeons and Dragons is what really, really did introduce us to one another. Yes, we already knew one another, But I think that it was the common denominator that
Mhm.
really brought us together and what formed our friendship. I mean, that I think if I remember this right, because gosh, this was back in like 1994. One of the main reasons that we did move in together was so we had the common place where everybody could come, and we were already there. All the books and the gaming stuff was there. We
Mhm.
had a room in the house dedicated to the game, and this huge round table, and we had like 4 or 5 different couches around it, and I mean it was insane. But I attribute I think our initial friendship to the game,
Mhm.
and then after outside of the game, we grew even closer because then we were doing things that didn't necessarily involve Dungeons and Dragons or one of the other games that we were playing, such as Vampire the Masquerade or Boot Hill or GURPS or whichever
Wrestling.
one we happened to be playing. Yes, wrestling, the WWF wrestling game. Gosh, that was a big one for us. That's a totally different podcast just by itself. The WWF wrestling game, but I think the game itself, Dungeons and Dragons, really contributed to that. And if it hadn't been for that, we probably wouldn't be doing this today.
No.
Even without the Dungeons and Dragons theme, if it hadn't been for that, we probably wouldn't have been doing this today.
Probably not.
So as far as my introduction to the game, like he said, it was definitely Bo who introduced me to the game. And then I don't know. I don't recall. It's been so long ago. I don't know exactly how many times we got together, or what kind of characters we were playing, or anything like that. But over the course of the years that went by, every time one of us popped up in like a game that somebody else would maybe running, the other one ended up showing up. Whether or not he was there first or whether I was there first, one way or another, it always came back to, well, Clay and Bo are now playing Dungeons and Dragons together again, or
Mhm.
whatever. So my initial introduction was definitely though from you for sure. Did it have a big impact on you at first, or did it just seem like something to pass time, or was this something when you got I hate to say got into it, because obviously if you got into it, I mean, then you're hooked, but did it grab you right from the beginning? And was it something that just said, you know what, I really like this?
It definitely took me from the very beginning. Like I stated the first time whenever I played it, the guy that ran it for me, introduced it to me, he was already outgrown it. He wasn't interested in it anymore. So I got hooked. And so I was like, who can I find to play this game? And I just kind of started asking around, with college. And it was a small community college, so it wasn't like a big major college that I went to. So my resource was limited, but I did find a few guys who was interested. Like I said, we became friends. We would get together still in game and had a good time. We just and it just so happened that I found the guys that was playing were actually my neighbors upstairs from the apartment that I was renting out, me and 3 other guys, and it was just my upstairs neighbors that actually played. Got with those 2 guys, and we kind of got together and gamed and started playing. And then after that year finished, we decided to get in together, and we just continued playing. So it hooked me from the beginning, and I never looked back because I enjoy running, playing, all this, because I get to me, it feels like I get to step out of my own life and live a life that I will never truly be. So I get to be something, and I'm never going to be an actor. I'm never going to be anything like that. So this is the closest I could get to being something that I'm not.
Right. Without the negative implication that it has received in the past.
Yes.
Which we'll get into. But, and that may where it segues now. I don't know. But I was hooked from the beginning too, but probably for a reason that I'm not necessarily proud of now, but because my parents hated the game so much. And, I don't even really know why, other than the fact that there were so many churches and religions and against the Dungeons and Dragons at the time, saying it was satanic and evil and whatnot. They really had an issue with me playing the game, which back when you're that age just makes you want to do it even more.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of pushed it, a little bit, obviously. But one of the things that confused me on that was, and why I didn't understand why my parents wouldn't look at it just a little bit different, is because one of the guys' house that you and I were both playing at the time was a preacher. He was the DM. He was the dungeon master, and he was an actual preacher of a church in the town. As a matter of fact, he's still a preacher today, 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought to myself, why does my church, or, now don't get me wrong, the church that I attended when I was younger and that my parents are still involved with today, did not say you should not play Dungeons and Dragons. But we knew what the stance was. And I knew what my parents thought about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew what public television and media and other things wanted you to think about it based upon the stories that they were taking, was that it was this evil game.
Yeah.
And I think it's mainly because there are spellcasters in the game, and the Bible preaches against witchcraft and things of that nature. So I think that was kind of the correlation more than anything. But I don't think there was a lot of research done. Now, I may be wrong, but I don't think there was a lot of research done on why they took the stance that they did. They just took the stance because that's what, again, you were seeing on TV from other organizations that were Christian-based that were saying this is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, that made me want to play it at the time even more. So the more I played it because of that, the more I started liking the actual game itself, to a point to where eventually it wasn't even about that anymore. I didn't care about that anymore as far as playing now because it was a rebellion sort of thing. I was playing now because I love the freaking game.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think about that? What's your take on that as far as the rep that it got, whether it was earned or not, or anything like that, as for the outcry that the Christian community or the church itself said, no, this is evil?
Well, it's like anything, and I'm not going to badmouth churches because I'm a believer.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't look at everything as being evil. Like the Waterboy's mom always just said, that's the devil doing it. I don't see that as being that, and I never did. I didn't have the situation that Clay did. My parents didn't go against it because they thought it was evil or witchcraft. They just thought it was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Because I was spending a lot of time wanting to play it.
I think your dad still thinks that, doesn't he?
He still thinks it's a waste of time. And he don't understand why I play it. But, I enjoy it. So, I think it's a waste of time to go fishing as long as he does. But, he enjoys it.
See, that to me right there is important. The fact that we're doing it because we enjoy it. We're not doing it to cast these spells or to have these incantations or to get together and try to put some sort of hex on somebody.
Right.
We're not actually dressing up with chainmail and swords and chasing one another around the mall and that sort of stuff. But I mean, It's just we enjoy it. So why is it shunned when it's just something that we enjoy doing, as opposed to, it's something else that somebody else enjoys doing? But go ahead. I'm sorry.
It was, I can see the religious part of it. People back in the 60s, 70s, 80s was where it was trying to transition from the classic, the what they call the 60s, 70s way of thinking, the housewives and women not working, and just, that was a different time all to itself. And then you get to where the 80s, we were growing up, and we were, even though D&D was, Dungeons and Dragons was already going around, I don't think it really started getting real popular until the 80s and late 70s, early 80s. And so the churches see this, they're casting spells, and they're doing all this stuff. It's evil. And then they had, out in 1982, if I'm not mistaken, a movie was released that starred Tom Hanks in it. Mm-hmm. And the movie was called Monsters and Mazes, or Mazes and Monsters, something like that. I think it was
Mazes and Monsters, because it was a play on Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. And it was geared towards Dungeons and Dragons, but it wouldn't say Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. It was very loosely based on it, but you knew what it was supposed to be.
And that came out, and people were like, oh my God, it'll make people go crazy and stuff like that. And what they don't understand is, in that movie, the kids already had issues before. They had actual home issues. I think some parents were alcoholics for the characters in the movie, and some people just were didn't really take care of their kid that well, and was kind of didn't like them even being around them. And it's just different ones had different issues, and they used the game as a way to escape their real life and play. But they took that, and one of the characters actually got into it too much and thought it was reality. And so now, not only was the religious groups using it to say, oh my goodness, this is going to promote witchcraft and all that, they're also saying, oh, this is going to also influence them and make them believe it's reality, and they're going to lose touch with reality. I don't believe that any more than I believe music will influence a person's.
Yeah.
I mean,
such as Ozzy Osbourne's supposed connection with the kid committing suicide.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
Or video games, making it to where, granted, I do believe some video games give if a person is doing nothing but playing video games. Prime example, I know my daughter dated a guy who played a video game, and he joined the military because he played first-person shooters, and he thought, oh, this is going to be great. I could do this in real life. And he got in it, and he couldn't even make it through the boot camp because it was just reality hit.
Yeah.
So I don't think Dungeons and Dragons affected people like that.
And see, I don't think it's just the game. Now, yes, a lot of those shooting games like that get glorified, and it seems like a cool thing to do to maybe live that life of the person who's in Grand Theft Auto, and he's going out and he's stealing this car, and he's beating up this person, he's shooting at this person. But Dungeons and Dragons is sort of the same, but it's based in a different time. So instead of going out and stealing the car, you steal the wagon. Or instead of going and shooting somebody, you chase somebody with an axe, or something like that. But to take what you see on the video game, or what you hear in the song, or what you have experienced playing the game, and when people attempt to go out and do that based upon that itself, there's other things going on there. There's way more problems than you cannot take an average citizen, sound of mind, no issues whatsoever, play a video game for 3 weeks straight and then just go out and start killing people.
Right.
That's not going to happen. There's other seeds there that have produced a problem that was there long before the video game. Now, did the fact that he was able to shoot all these people in this video game help the situation? No. But there was other contributing factors. It's never just the game. It's never just the music, whatever. But it does lead me to ask this then. If there was such a problem with it then in the eyes of the church, why is it not a problem now? And if it is, why do we not hear about it anymore? Because there's more media these days than what there ever has been, between social media and actual media on the television, watching the news or whatever. But situations with Dungeons and Dragons or the church's stance against it or whatever, I haven't heard that in years.
Yeah. Well, I contributed that to the different types of medias. Back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, really not as much in the 90s. Once internet came about and people were able to communicate easier with each other, you got from where your only way of getting information was either from a newspaper or television, radio. Well, those three are ran by companies.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, some of these, like Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff is ran by individuals too, are now big companies. Right. But it's more individuals' ideas, more the individual people. And the more that got out, more people are saying, oh, wait a minute, this guy is not too much different than me. Hey, yeah, I agree with him. And I think that really built it up to where they didn't have the fear factor that they could portray in the news. So this is not that big of a deal anymore, because to them, they're like, well, we can't use it as a fear thing.
Right, because there's so many other outlets for them to actually learn from it. If they take the opportunity to learn from it. But that's good possibility. That's honestly something I haven't ever considered. But yeah, I would definitely say that that's a possibility. So to go kind of along lines with that, you'd mentioned earlier the type of persons that played then versus the type of persons played now. I don't know if that's a fair way to put it, but the player base has definitely changed, I think, from back then to now. Now, not to say that I was a nerd or you was a nerd or anything like that, but it was typecasted that back then it was more the nerdy type people that played Dungeons and Dragons. Now, is it that per se, or is it more like an outcast sort of individual that they didn't have a lot of friends other than, this group here? And because of whether this person was going through this and didn't have friends, and this person was going through this and didn't have friends and or whatnot, was this group more accepting of this individual than what a popular group would have been, because they already knew what it was like to be shunned by the more popular groups? So that, to me, I think anyway, is why initially it was a group of not necessarily nerds, but outcasts, those who didn't have a lot of friends in other circles.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that? I don't.
Wholeheartedly. I mean, the game was mainly played by socially awkward people.
Yeah, that's a good term.
They didn't know how to interact with just regular people, and they weren't cool. They weren't bad people. They were not popular.
There's some sort of irony in that, though, isn't there? That they didn't know how to interact with a real person, but they could take this character that they created in their mind and react with 4 or 5 other created characters and have more of a life in that than what they ever had in their own.
Yep.
I mean, that to me is one of the reasons why it should have been looked at as more acceptable, for the groups of people back then who were shunning it, because it was now providing these outcasts with a group that they didn't have before.
Right.
Who cares that they're getting together and rolling dice and slaying pretend dragons and casting pretend spells? They weren't out doing drugs.
Right.
They weren't out going to keg parties. Now, whether it's because they were nerds, who knows? But they weren't. I mean, they had options of other things, but they were doing a safe thing in the basement of their buddy's house.
Mm-hmm.
And not causing anybody any harm whatsoever.
Right.
And it actually give them the opportunity to have friends. On the other side of that, there was many other positive things I feel like Dungeons and Dragons has done for people. Not just give them friends that they didn't have before back then. There's mathematics in Dungeons and Dragons. There's reading and writing in Dungeons and Dragons. So, I mean, just to put basic skills and involve it with a game where math wasn't fun before, now all of a sudden figuring out your percentage chance to pick that lock if you're a thief, I mean, you now get into numbers.
Right.
So, I mean, I look at that as a big reason why parents or the church or whoever was against it back then should have looked at that just a little bit different. And not just for one or two cases of individuals who may have went off the rails and done something, stupid. Look at what good it was doing for so many back then.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, see, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And then again, I'm going to say it falls back on the public's opportunity and capability of getting other normal people's opinion about it, and not just this news organization's opinion or this religious group's opinion. They were the focus point of that's what got put out there.
Mm-hmm.
Was this group or this group or whatever. And then when social media started coming around, it became a little bit more public. People were like, hey, yeah, I don't think that's so bad, and more people got into it. And I know over the years the whole nerd thing has grown, which goes and coincides with Dungeons and Dragons, because it was primarily played by nerds or socially outcasts. But those people in school, they were shunned, they were looked down upon, they didn't have any friends. But then after high school, they're the ones who made the millions of dollars,
right,
that became heads of business. Things like that changing. The nerds have gone from being the socially awkward, the outcasts, to basically running the country a lot, because they're the heads of a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
That it wasn't such a bad thing. And because of that, more people got into it, because there wasn't this negative influence all the time towards it. And it went from this being the socially outcast people to, hey, it's cool to play.
Right.
Like me, I never would have considered myself, even though I was in the heart of that it was the socially awkward people that played it, I never considered myself socially awkward.
No, I didn't either. Even before I knew you.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first times I recall Bo was in front of hundreds of people at a school talent show. He was the only one on the stage talking on this microphone. And socially awkward people aren't going to do that. So Bo was definitely not socially awkward and did not have that reason to be playing the game. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was one of the popular kids in school. I liked everybody. I was friends with everybody, but I wasn't the most popular because I wasn't a jock. But then again, like I said, I went to a small school, so
Yeah.
there wasn't as much room for like big cliques.
Right.
But I was accepted by everyone.
And then when he says small school, I mean, I think I graduated with 23 people.
Yeah, I think 25 was my graduating class.
So I mean, there's people out there right now going, "Oh my God, I can't imagine being in a actual grade with 25." And you knew every single person in your class. There was not anybody that you didn't. Well, I mean, I know who it is, but I mean, no, you knew every single person in the class. So I mean, yeah, that you didn't really have. You didn't have a lot of different groups anyway, because, I mean, groups of one, I mean, come on. So there wasn't a lot of socially awkward situations that we had to possibly overcome anyway, because typically you were accepted by just about everybody. So,
yes.
Yep. But anyway, all right. So eventually, then, these small groups wanted to branch out, and they wanted to find more like-minded individuals. So one of the original creators of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax, he had this big idea. And what big idea was that?
Conventions. Gaming conventions.
Gaming conventions. Now, see, this is another thing that I find odd about the way people used to look at this game, and the fact that they had actual conventions based around it. Now, is your average everyday citizen going to participate in this convention? No. Well, probably not. And, there have been television shows in the past that have sort of poked fun at the idea of, comic conventions or gaming conventions or, whatever. But they created this idea initially as a way for other people, like-minded individuals, to get together and talk about or play the game that they all enjoyed playing and meeting new people.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that is a huge step in itself, to taking these people who were socially awkward and giving them the opportunity now to meet even more people that they would have never met before without that sort of situation to do it in.
Right. Gave them the opportunity to expand their friends and expand on something that all of them loved and kind of bring them together. You might find out that your neighbor down the street who you never talked to was into Dungeons and Dragons, and you met up at the convention.
Just run into them.
Right.
Like, whoa.
Right.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And it starts friendships, and it just over the years became bigger and bigger. If I'm not mistaken, there was like 29 people in the very first convention that was held at Gary Gygax's basement of his house.
Yeah, I think it was in his basement.
Yeah, I think there was like 29 people that showed up on the very first convention.
And I don't know, without doing research, if that was by invite or if that was, if they just put the word out and that many people showed up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not either.
But it's just interesting to me the way it grew, over the course of the years that followed after that. Well, you personally have been to several of the gaming conventions.
Yes.
What is the difference in playing Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game at a convention versus at home?
The main difference is that you get a variety of someone else running a game for you. Most games only lasted maybe an hour or two. So they basically, you didn't roll up a character, you didn't.
So they already had like pre-generated characters.
Pre-generated characters, and you come in and they say what kind of character you want to play, and they name off the ones they have. You'd pre-sign up for games. You know, you had to sign up early, or if it's a full session, you wouldn't be able to play with that person. And you could go in and they hand you the character sheet. You'd read over it, get ready to play, and you played your character.
So that was kind of where the initial one-shots came from.
Yes.
I mean, you sat down with the intention of knowing this was only going to last an hour, hour and a half, and the DM would start, and there would be just like this little situation, and then you either accomplish it or you didn't accomplish it.
And most of the time, what made them different is the ones I was at, you had the DM got to choose at least one player out, maybe even two, out of the group who he felt really played their character, that really went above and beyond playing, and they would give a free, like it might be a free DMG, the newest Dungeon Master Guide, or a new role-playing game that just came out that they were able to hand out.
Yeah.
Certificates, different things like that. So that's what made it really different. Plus, you had celebrity panels who would come in. You know, back then it wasn't like it is nowadays. You know, nowadays you've got so many different kind of cons that you can go to, that you would have all these different people. Like Gary Gygax would show up at a lot of these conventions if it was the bigger ones, like Gen Con or something like that.
Well, I figured. I feel like though that the difference between back then and now though is back then it was based more on role playing games. Now they've taken so many different things and combined it into this one convention sort of thing, whether it be comic books and Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons and different kinds of role-playing games, or Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, and you know, and they just throwed it all together in this one thing for, well, you know, I just feel like it's more diverse these days. It was definitely based more about gaming then. So the celebrity cast or the special guests that they can bring in varies more now than what it would have back then.
Yes.
Because back then it would have been based on, it may have been somebody you didn't know, because it may have been the illustrator of the inserts for the newest White Wolf book, you know, or whatever, which you had no idea who that was, but still he signed the inside of your book, so that was cool.
Yeah.
One of them, didn't they have the guy who wrote the WWF?
That's how I found out about it. I seen this guy set
right.
up.
We didn't even know it was a game.
Right.
Then.
I seen it set up and it said WWF before it had to become WWE wrestling. And we were big wrestling fans. I've been a wrestling fan forever. And I went up there to him, talked to him and everything. And the guy who had the license from the WWF to use their likeness, he made this role-playing game. He signed the book. I bought that book from him, talked to him for a while, and that was one of the funnest games we played as a group for a while. We took it and just really went all geared towards that game.
We did have a really good time with that game. And then, you know, it was a role-playing game, but this was definitely more about combat and more about dice rolls and this person versus this person and this move versus this move and whatnot. Where the role-playing came in was just your own imagination on the characters you created or the characters you were playing, and the fact that my mom and dad had a video camera and we used it and we recorded videos and we recorded interview sessions and just all kinds of stuff for these wrestling characters. That was where the role-playing came in. And you could gain certain amount of experience points for different categories of what your character would do. So if you did like an interview like that, I mean, you got a certain experience point or, whatever that you could put towards leveling your character up. And it's been so long since we played that game, I don't even remember exactly how the level up worked. But that was just an example. There would be special guests at these conventions, but you would have no idea who they are until you went up to them. And then later on is when they become just a little bit bigger once the game took off or whatever. That was a good way to introduce people that were trying to make a name for themselves even. So conventions to me, I thought were really cool. I personally never went to a gaming convention. I had the opportunity. I know there was one that you guys attended while we were living together. It may have been more than one. I can't remember. But I know for sure there was one that you guys attended while we were living together. I definitely had the opportunity to go. I don't remember now why it was that I didn't. I'm assuming it was work, or couldn't get off or something like that. I don't know for sure. But I would have liked to have, but to have that experience that I could talk a little bit more about now, but because I think that would have been something really, really fun to participate in. Now, I have been to big Magic tournaments. I have played, Magic for years. I did go, have been to, comic conventions and, things like that where they do different, aspects from several different genres of whatnot, and throw it together under one roof. But speaking of Magic, the Gathering, that is actually one of the main things that came from conventions eventually. Because if I understand it right, and I understand the history, Magic was initially created as a game to play between sessions at conventions. And so, but nowadays, Magic is actually bigger than what the Dungeons and Dragons side of it is anymore. Magic did take a hit just like everything else during the pandemic, but there are still major professional Magic tournaments that pay big money. But again, I think, Magic, that's where it got its start, was in gaming conventions.
Yeah, I think it was like anything else. It was a game, but also a card collecting.
Yeah.
You wanted to collect the cards, so you always went out because depending on which cards you got, built your deck where it made it more powerful or whatever. I never really was into the Magic as much as he was.
I was just fixing to say that. I don't remember what the actual reasoning was, unless it was just because, everybody else was doing it, so that's why he wasn't going to. But Bo never really got into Magic. But now, the second the Vampire card game came out and the Star Trek card game came out, he was all over. He was all about it. He was itching to play. He wanted to play Magic. I could tell. He wanted to play these card games with us. But it was because it was like, it was taking away from gaming. It was taken away from Dungeons & Dragons, because now there were 5 or 6 of us that instead of immediately starting to play our Dungeons & Dragons game or whatever we was playing that week or that day of that week, instead we now had to play Magic for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And I think that was, I don't think he's ever told me or said that was the reason why, but I think that's part of it. And I do understand that, because for a large part, Bo was one of the main GMs, whether we were playing superheroes, or Dungeons & Dragons, or Vampire. Bo was always one of the main GMs. And any dungeon master or game master knows that you have to put a certain amount of work to prepare to run a game.
Yeah.
And if 5 or 6 of these yahoos that are gaming with you, I was one of the yahoos, are playing Magic instead of ready to participate in what you have prepared for that week, it could be a little bit aggravating. So, I mean, am I right or am I wrong? Is that one of the reasons? I mean, I feel like that was that, and the fact that 5 or 6 of us were doing it, so you were like, you know what? I'm going to prove a point, and I'm not going to jump on this bandwagon. I'm going to stay with, gaming as opposed to playing this card game.
Yes, and that is true. I seen it coming up, and to me, I was like, you know what? I don't want to play Magic. I want to play Dungeons & Dragons. I want to play a role-playing game. That's a card game that you're putting there. Let's go play spades. You want to go play cards. Let's go play spades or something like that. You know, and it's just, yes, I probably missed out, and it's probably something I could get into, but I'm at this stage now that I don't really have the desire
Right.
to play it. And I really, times I did, but I didn't want to have to fork up the money
Right.
to get into it the way that they all got into it, and I just never tried that hard with it because I didn't have the money base to put on it, and I was already spending so much money trying to keep the D&D game
Right.
where I wanted it. So
now, for those of you familiar with the game and who are trying to put this timeline together, and you're thinking, when was it that they were playing Magic? Yes, you're right. And it will make you sick to your stomach because we were playing Magic in 1993, early 94. So what sets was that? That's right. I had those cards. I don't have them anymore, or I would be, I'd have a lot more money than what I do now. But again, when Jihad, the Eternal Struggle, that was the name of that card game.
mm-hmm.
And then the Star Trek The Next Generations card game came out. He was all over it.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I had to get into it too because this is what he now wanted to play. So I also had to get the cards we could play, and we did. Those were more a one-on-one type games. And Magic's a one-on-one game too, don't get me wrong, but back when Magic first started, you could play it more in a group. Now, you can still play it in a group these days in commander pods and stuff like that, but we played it more round table Magic back in the day. And so this being more one-on-one, that was fun for us, to have the vampire cards, or to have the Star Trek cards. Matter of fact, the very first pack of Star Trek cards I opened had Jean-Luc Picard in it.
Yes.
I recall that. Going to that card shop, it was the initial release. It was the black border ones. The very first pack I opened had Jean-Luc Picard, and I rubbed that in his face every single time I had the opportunity.
And he did.
Because he was the one that wanted to go out and get these cards, and I'm the one who opened up the good captain and had the good deck and that sort of stuff. But we still had fun, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yes.
He beat me, I beat him, it's here and there. So the gaming conventions, was there anything else, that you wanted to hit on with that as far as and one thing with the gaming conventions that I think it also did, not only brought people together, you met people that you'd never met before, but it actually gave the opportunity for the people that you were playing with back at home, the opportunity to become even closer. Because when you're taking 5 or 6, 7 guys and all going to this convention, but again, we're all younger. It's 1993, 94. We don't have any money, so we're all splitting one hotel room. You get kind of close with people in that situation.
Yes, you do.
So, but to me, that's a positive.
Yes.
The room may have smelled like farts and stale pizza and anything else that, guys are popular for, but it's still, if you can take a group of 7 people who are already friends and put them in one room together, one of 2 things are going to happen. You're either going to hate each other when it's over, or you're going to even be closer. And for us, it was always, the latter. We were always closer in the end. So, I really didn't know if we were going to get this vlogcast in one video or not. But I don't think we're going to. I'm really thinking that you guys are going to have to come back for part 2. Because just from the list of notes that we made, now we're not scripted in any way, don't get me wrong.
No.
But we did make some notes. And I'm not barely through the first page, not even close to the first page yet. So I'm thinking, let's call this part 1 and invite everybody to come back next week for part 2.
For our second edition.
For our second vlogcast, part 2 of Dungeons and Dragons. So I think that's probably going to be the best. Otherwise, my computer's probably not going to want to upload this video. So
yes, and there's so much that needs to be said. So many different people, different situations that needs to be, acknowledged. There's no way we can get it all in one session.
So let's do that then. You guys, if you enjoyed this one, even if you didn't, come back anyway. Join us next week for part 2, and we'll see if we can get this rounded out. Hopefully it won't take 3, but we'll see. I mean, you just never know. I mean, if the conversation's still going good and we need to break it into a third one, we'll see about breaking it into a third one. But as of right now, we're going to try and round this up next week. So, guys, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, and join us next week here on Critical Hits
and Bad Misses.